Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. I'm going to start with the date right out of the gates because good goddamn politics is moving way too fast in this province right now. We are recording this at noon on February 1st. It should be up in 2 days. And by then, I assume that parts of the province will either have completely fallen into the ocean because that would be the kind of thing that happens now. But uh, we got this conversation that we gotta have, and we're probably going to be having that conversation over several weeks and months as we approach the next legislative session. But we need to start it today, so we're starting it today, and we're very excited to have someone new on the show. This is somebody who has a the coolest last name in the history of last names, first of all, and B comes to the conversation from a place of experience and advocacy. So our guest today is, and I'm reading from my notes here, an atypical advocate or atypical activist advocate. She's a writer, she's a poet, she's a speaker, and she plays a mean ukulele. Very excited
Oh,
to welcome to the show, Pam Rocker.
that's a very important part of my life and my activism and staying sane. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting.
Yeah, no, I got to say, I before I hopped on here, I was doing a little bit of research and Christmas Eve, hey?
Oh, I know what you're talking about there. Yes,
Yeah, Pam's
yes,
got some music and videos
yeah. A very special song called "The Gift That Keeps on Giving." You can find that on my website.
there. And what's that website? See, I did it at the beginning so we could get the plug in at the front.
Amazing. It's easier to remember because it's just my name, pamrocker.com.
Perfect. There we go. Um, now I'm going to get straight to the point here. Eh, Actually, no, I'm going to let you introduce yourself first, and then I'm going to get straight to the point because I found something else in my research that I think makes a really good introduction point. So, before we get into the dumpster fire that is Alberta politics and everything else, who is Pam Rocker?
Yeah, well, uh, I am super gay and I have been doing work in queer faith intersections for about 15 years professionally. And, I'm a really big advocate for, you know, that anything that we can do in any of our identities to support other people, we should do. So, in my work with faith communities, it's when there's a religious attack, there should be a religious response, right? Um, that's our responsibility to protect people. That's our call. And, the other things I do on top of that is, yeah, I am a musician and a presenter, and I do consulting on this sort of thing. And, just in general, I would say sort of my life credo is to let people know they're not alone, right? This I come from this very, 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 very conservative family in Texas. I used to subscribe to Rush Limbaugh's newsletter as a teenager, like I did. um, and I grew up in a world where somebody like me couldn't exist. And so, here I am today, for some reason lucky enough to be alive and thriving, and I have a wife and kids, and I want to let folks know that they aren't alone. Whatever their path is, whoever they are, whatever their age is, that they deserve to have a life that unfolds in the way that they see themselves. So whether that's through working with corporations, churches, politics, whatever that might be, I'm going to get my little grubby fingers in there and try to do what I can.
Boy, I got a couple questions coming out of that introduction. First one has to be, what's the difference between gay and super gay, and can you fly?
Well, if you look at my hair, that's the super part. It's a little bit turned today because I'm a little, I'm upset. So sometimes it kind of like a dolphin's fin kind of goes over. But I think I say that obviously jokingly, but part of that is just like I want to be really public about who I am. There's not a heck of a lot of people who will say openly that they're a queer Christian. And I also put myself in a lot of spaces where somebody wouldn't expect either of those identities, much less both. And so I think it's really important to, for visibility, that I take that on as much as I can because I do have some relative privilege in the place I am in life, because so many people don't have that. They can't claim all of the pieces of their identity that are true for them. And so I think I take, the lead from my queer role models and ancestors who did that for me in order for me to be in the place that I am. And so if I can pay that forward by being out and proud whenever I can be, and somebody sees that and says, hey, like somebody like me does exist, or maybe I am going to be okay no matter what people in my life are telling me, then it's worth it.
I'm going to ask the question in a way that I'm sure that there are some people who would ask the question, and then I'm going to follow up with another one. Um, when did you first choose to be gay?
I see a trick coming. Never. I mean, I chose against it, right? Like that's the willpower. I think people don't understand how much willpower queer people have. Like how they talk about us is like we're running rampant with no, sense of morality and um, you know, self-consciousness at all. And it's like, oh my gosh, like this, if I could have chosen to not be in the environment that I was in, it would have been over like forever ago. Um, but what's really interesting is people have asked me that a lot, or asked me, when did you first kind of realize or think that maybe there was something different? And I remember when I was 5 years old, I just remember kind of looking around at, because you look around as a kid, you notice so many things, but you have no language for it, right? And I just remember seeing like the romantic relationships around me, and it didn't seem familiar to me. It didn't quite make sense. And so even though like I knew it was my mom and dad and they loved each other a lot, kind of looking around, I was like, oh, something is not really clicking for me. And obviously, it wasn't till much later till I began to realize that, like, for me, it was not familiar because what that wasn't the actual, true instinct of who I was to be with somebody of the opposite sex, right? And so, I think in so often in these conversations, people try to sexualize this. It's, every single thing about being queer. It had nothing to do with that. I was just looking at relationships around me thinking, like, oh, I see they love each other, but it looks weird. You know what I mean? And, so who gave me that idea? God, right? Nobody planted that, right? In my head. We lived in a village of 700 people. The only show I watched was like Gummy Bears on Saturdays, right? On a black and white TV. Nobody was trying to groom me into thinking this. And so, yeah, I mean, from a young age, it's that idea of like, oh, there's something a little bit different, or I'm not feeling the same thing that everybody else is talking about, but you don't say anything. Obviously, you're not like, hey, what about this? Like, of course not. You just sit back and you try to like hope that maybe it's going to make sense someday.
I'm gonna have the Gummy Bears theme song stuck in my head for the rest of the day. So I want to thank you for that. The introduction
It's a
is,
solid show.
I mean,
Listen,
it had some like surprisingly dark moments too. It was not
it
just
did.
like haha candy. The reason that I asked the question the way that I did is because um I watched your beat poem, My
Mm,
Heart. And
hmm.
one of the things that really struck me in listening to that, and for anybody who's listening to this, I would strongly encourage you to go swing by Pam's website and via that her YouTube channel where you can watch her deliver this beat poem. Um, you're talking in that poem, and you sort of explain that realization. I don't know if that's the right word. Forgive me if it's
Mm,
not. And you're at some very young ages, you were figuring out, oh, hey, wait, I think maybe things are a little different for me.
yeah,
Um, and I think that that's one of the pieces that people really don't understand when we talk about LGBTQ2S plus issues is there's this perception that like, oh, it's like it's like choosing what kind of car to drive. And
right,
it's not. Am I wrong?
right. You're not wrong, and I think here's the thing. So many people, it we wouldn't ask what caused quote unquote people to be gay if we didn't want to find something wrong with it, right? It's not a question. We don't say what causes heterosexuality. Let's look at their childhood and what trauma they experienced, right? I mean, that's just not what we do, right? So we ask the question. I say collective we. I don't ask the question, but that question is asked because they're seeking to find some sort of insidious origin in order to say, oh, well, if we just help you fix that thing, or you choose to not let that impact you anymore, then you're going to be normal like the rest of us, and we don't have to, worry about you. And I think, that's where I completely differ from folks who come from those points of view. I used to come from that point of view, right? I said, how I grew up, and it gave you a little taste of that. So, but here's the thing, right? Like, um, we always, have we as kids we experiment, right, all the time, right? We're always like putting on our parents' shoes or trying out our dog's leash. Like we're just doing whatever, we're eating mustard straight out of the refrigerator, right? Like we're doing a lot of things and playing around, but there is innate things that we do realize about ourselves. Sometimes it's at an early age, sometimes it's later because of the environment perhaps that we've been in where that's not even a possibility. So for example, I say, I started noticing stuff, and I can kind of look back at when I was 5 and putting some things together. And I said, my Cabbage Patch dolls would kiss each other in the dark, right? They would, right? And so I didn't come out till I was 25. So there's a 20 years of journey that you don't see in between me thinking, oh, like, what is this? Into me living into it. And that was after being married to a man and working at the biggest evangelical church in Canada and doing everything I could to be quote unquote good and acceptable and holy. Right. And I think ultimately what we as a society have to do if we're going to actually attain sustainable equality and just looking at each other as people is we can't equate heterosexuality with holiness. We can't. Because whether we're a person of faith or not, it's sort of held as this like sacred thing. Like here's the grail, being, somebody who is with the opposite sex and having a family or whatever, right? And listen, I have nothing wrong with heterosexuals. Some of my best friends are, but um, I do keep an eye on them though. But it's this. This is just as much as anything else. I have blue eyes. I love music. I love dogs. Um, all of those things are things that are completely natural for me. So the thing that was unnatural, the thing that was abnormal, the thing that seemed, perverse and weird to me was being heterosexual or acting like it. And that's where I felt icky. That's where I felt wrong. That's where I felt like, oh, this is what love is. This is what it's supposed to be, right? And so I know that the what I believe is true is that we are all born with whoever we're going to be. And it's really the situation that we're in that allows us to explore that or not. And, and so that's why, for me, it took 25 years. That's why for other people, it takes 70 years, right? Um, the situations we're born into, the environments we have, what we're taught to believe about ourselves and other people, who we're taught to hate, the characteristics that we're taught are only male or only female, all these different boxes that we are completely just put into depending on our genitals when we're born. And we're put into these boxes of who you're going to be, what you're going to dress like, who you're going to be attracted to, like before we can even say anything. And so we have to spend our lives figuring out if those boxes fit us or not. And then what are the consequences of if they don't? And so I think when people, read that sometimes queer folks are confused or whatever, it's like, I think we all might be a little bit confused if from the day we're born, we're treated like our own reality is a myth. And and we have to figure out, do we risk not belonging in the environment that we're in anymore, which is our basic human instinct? We want to belong. Of course we do. Or do we risk saying, I think I might have this feeling about who I am? And that's just something that heterosexual people never have to worry about. It's like you see 3-year-old boys, they're like, "Ooh, does he have a girlfriend?" Like they have no problem having those conversations and just assuming that, yeah. And so that's why I'm saying, like, the ultimately at the end of the day, yes, every person is sacred, but there's nothing more or less sacred about being attracted to the opposite sex and being attracted to the same sex. We're created as who we are, and it's beautiful, and there's nothing that we need to be afraid of about each other.
A couple of things that I want to pick out of what you said there. One of them was I love, love, love the positioning of I have some straight friends. That's well played on that one. But one of the things that really kind of struck me as you were speaking there is it seems like to me, and this is where I'm going to ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like to me if we were trying to set kids up for success and to expedite, if you will, their journey, because you said yourself, like some people it's 20 years, some people it's 70 years. If we wanted to
Yeah.
expedite that journey for them so that they could be their true authentic selves as quickly as possible, uh, we would be able to have conversations about, hey, these are what the options, there's all sorts of there's many different flavors of ice cream. Some people like vanilla. Some people they're a little bit more of the rocky road. Both are okay.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems like what's happening is because there's this default position of anything other than hetero is bad.
Mm-hmm.
That what one of the things that we're and there's that default position of, well, it must be a choice. Um,
Right.
one of the things that it seems like is happening is there's this movement to say, okay, well, maybe if we just take away all of those instruction manuals, if you will, uh,
Mm-hmm.
driving a standard is very different than driving an automatic. If you don't know the differences and you aren't trained how to do it, it's going to take you a while to figure it out. You might get in some car accidents before you do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it seems like there's this movement to take away those manuals or that reality that, hey, there's a bunch of different boxes to potentially choose from.
Mm-hmm.
That's only going to stunt kids, and depending on how long it takes them to find the manual or the box that works for them, adults. Like am I reading that wrong, or is it does it seem like there's a deliberate movement to like, hey, maybe if we just pretend that it is a choice and that we can just like not tell people, then
Mm-hmm.
people will just not. become, and I'm air quoting the hell out of that for the audio listeners. Uh,
Right.
and now there's balloons. I don't know why. Become gay or become, bi, LGBTQ2S plus, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that you're imagining it. I think that's reality, right? I think what I see, if I were to say it succinctly, is that they're trying to remove all social visibility of 2S LGBTQ people, and really make it so that, um, if kids are looking around in their school, reading books, hearing about different possibilities for families, etc., that they can't see themselves in it. So they're trying to, in those controlled environments, to say, okay, if we take out any of the possibilities that aren't default heterosexual cisgender, then we can prevent you from thinking that this is an option for you, right? Um, so, I mean, the strategy is not really veiled, right? It's like, oh, they're not old enough to think about this, but that's because they're sexualizing it, right? It's like, again, heterosexual people read books that have heterosexuals in them every day, listen to songs about heterosexual relationships every single day, right? So having books and having conversations that there's other realities other than that is just as normal and just as good for people to read. And I have yet to find somebody who reads a book that has, homosexual characters or gay characters in it. I'm just using the word homosexual because that's what they use all the time, but I hate it because it's they always use it in a derogatory, dehumanizing way. Um, but if they have queer characters in those books, somebody who is doesn't have that identity isn't going to be like, oh, this is me. Hopefully what they're going to do is be like, oh, there's people who are different than me in the world, and that's okay, and I don't need to be afraid. So all of these attempts to take this out is, to me, like trying to, if anybody's seen that movie Don't Look Up, right? It's like trying to say, like, okay, the moon doesn't exist, and it exists, it's there, but okay, but don't talk about it, don't look at it, don't, discover anything about it, don't worry, whatever. And it's like, we are still going to exist, those kids are still going to be who they are. The only thing that you have changed, the only thing you have changed, is whether that kid feels like they belong. And when they're in this time, whatever age that might be, of thinking about who they might be attracted to, who they are, what clothes they like, what makeup feels good, what their hair is like every other person in the world. Um, what you're going to do is have them have to mask who they are in order to fit in, because number one, they probably feel like they're really weird, because they're not seeing any other representation. And they also feel like there's going to be a consequence, because guess what? There usually is. From their parents, from their relatives, from their place of worship, from their school, from their teacher, from their peers. And so even if we had amazing curriculum and we actually had diverse books for everybody to read, because guess what? It's not just queer books for queer kids. Queer books for everybody, because I think I had to read 100% hetero books growing up. Didn't make me straight, let's just be aware that everybody exists and that that's okay. And even if we did that, it would still be a hard society to navigate. But at least we would say, hey, you're not alone. Your feelings aren't weird. There are people just like you. What you're dreaming of one day to have as a family or a romantic relationship or a community, it can be a reality, just like anybody else. You have the option to live life to its fullest, just like anybody else. That's it. That's all we want. We just want kids to live. That's it. And so, yeah, I think these attempts to just remove this social visibility is trying to sexualize it and make it mature content when it's really just like, hey, everybody exists and these different people exist. And whether folks are uncomfortable with that or feel like it goes against their religious beliefs or not, the reality still stands. These people exist. And so they're probably your neighbor, they're probably your bus driver, they're probably bagging your groceries, they might be in your family. And so it's not just those people out there that have an agenda to try to destroy everything you hold dear. It is people beside you, sitting beside you at church, probably, who are seeing what you believe and what you say you believe and seeing if that matches up. Do you really believe in loving your neighbor? Do you really believe in compassion for everybody? And so, that's one thing I say all the time is that there are undercover people anywhere, not in a sneaky way, but to protect themselves. And so I have heard countless stories. I have 15 years of stories of people saying, it wasn't until I put a pride flag up that my neighbor of 20 years came out to me. 20 years, right? But until that moment, they didn't know if I was a safe person. They didn't want to lose me as a friend. So we as queer folks walk through life having to make these micro decisions from moment to moment of what's going to cost us something, what's going to potentially put us in danger. And to do that to children is reprehensible to me. And that's abusive. And so I think we have to realize that whether we are personally uncomfortable with it or it feels different to us, this is just a reality. And if we looked at a picture of 10 kids, one or two of them is going to be a part of the queer community in some way. If we just looked at them, okay, so we want those two, we're going to pick those two and we're going to say, you can't exist. Or we're going to put you in an environment where you don't have time to even explore or think about who you might be able to become. I I know why it keeps happening, but it still shocks me because I can see I can see the road. It is so clear to me. It's crystal clear about what exactly is happening and what exactly this is doing, even the conversation about it, but what this is doing to children who are hearing every single thing that we're saying.
It's it's wild to me because again, it's one of those things where it seems to me that so much of the push back or the need to pretend that these things aren't real is based purely on fear. It's based purely on I don't like how that makes me feel. So I'm just going to go ahead and ruin someone else's life. And it blows my mind how people either are unaware that that's what they're doing or they're completely comfortable with with the fact that that's what they're doing. I'm curious. I mean, my I want to hear your take because you come from both a place of being super gay and
Yes, yes.
you you have a religious thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my response has always been to people, when people say, "Well, God doesn't make mistakes." My response has been, "Yeah, you're right." And I kind of leave it there. And those who get it do, those who don't, I probably don't want to have too many conversations with anyways. But
Mm-hmm.
what do you say to, I mean, it's widely speculated that one of the reasons why we've seen the new provincial policy that we're seeing is a direct result of the influence of the extreme religious right on the Premier of Alberta. David Parker makes it very, very clear that he thinks he's on a mission from God and he's destined for greatness and nothing's ever gone wrong there. But
Mm-hmm.
what do you say to the people who aren't quite that extreme, but the people who are like, well, I go to church and they say that the gay is bad. What do you say to those people? What's your response to them as somebody who is super gay and who is a person of faith?
Hmm. Um, these are frequent conversations, and listen, that's what I used to believe for a long, long time. I led Bible studies against being gay. I preached against it. I did things I am extremely not proud of because of the world that I was in and the people I was surrounded by. And I believed that it was the right thing to do. I was told this is what I'm supposed to do. And I wasn't really taught to try to be aware of how that might actually impact somebody's life or have compassion. It was just like there's a certain way that we see family, and if the this idea of what a family is and what a partnership is altered in any way, that's really scary, and so we need to stop it. So depending on the different ways that people believe or how they came into that, I can imagine that in the life that I had before, that I can relate somewhat to this fear around difference, right? I married a man and I was like, okay, shoo, literally walking down the aisle. Now nobody's going to question that I'm straight. I got it, right? That's how much I committed to this idea. So if anybody thinks I don't get it, I committed to that. The issue is we come to the reality that being gay is a reality for so many people. They say 5 to 8%, sometimes 10% of the population. And I came to a point where finally I had tried every single thing that I could to change who I was. Um, and really started looking not only at the Bible differently than what I had been told from a very narrow point of view, but actually looking very theologically at the entire thing in a different way instead of just sort of taking on what was told to me. So that was part of it. But the other part of it was, how do I say this? Like one day before, before I came out, I distinctly remember this was like a couple months before I came out. I remember sitting in my bedroom and I just thought, God, I've tried everything and you've seen me do this. It's not going to work. Either I'm not going to live anymore or I have to be honest about who I am. So I've tried not being who I am. So now I have to have integrity because my faith calls me to have integrity about who I am. I couldn't hold that anymore. And so I was like, you have to be there for me because this is on you, for better or worse, whatever that is. And such a peace came over me that I can't describe. And it doesn't mean, ooh, my journey was easy from that moment, or I never had questions or struggles or anything like that. But I realized that, there's a saying like, we act like the God we believe in, right? And how the God that I believed in before was so tiny and judgmental and narrow minded. One of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, says, we know we're creating God in our own image when God hates the same people we do. Right. And so in that point in my life, like the God I believed in was so tiny. I talked about how big God was, but really in reality was so tiny and incapable of having any sort of imagination, any sort of scientific understanding. And I had to let go of that image. And I was like, I actually think that God is much more expansive than that. I actually think that who I want to kiss and go to the movies with and fall asleep with ice cream on my face watching Netflix with is way less important to the divine than how I live and love people. And it's not just that. I believe I was created gay. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like, oh, God loves me anyway. No, this is who I am. But at the end of the day, I just see it transformed my whole entire faith. Not only what I believe about queer folks, but what I believe about everybody. And I had to break that whole scaffolding down because I thought, wow, I have spent 25 years being thinking of myself as being in this circle, and I see everybody else as being out and I'm in. And it's really simple. Here's the things you do, here's the things that you don't do. If you do them, you're in. If you don't do them, you're out. And then we talk about everybody else as needing to be converted to our way so that they're in. And then I realized, I really see now that I think the life of Jesus for me as a Christian was about saying, hey, everybody, you're told that there's these politics about who's in or who's out. I'm here to say, no, that's not how it works. The most important person that you think there is, it doesn't mean anything. What means something is that you love each other. And the politics of our time doesn't matter. I'm not going to go in with that and conform with it. It is about how we see and love each other. And to me, that was changing my faith was harder than coming out as gay. It was because it changed my whole thinking about other people. And so here's what I would say to folks who are struggling and who are struggling in good faith, right? Like, I understand it is hard. It is hard when we come from those backgrounds. And sometimes we're taught that it is a house of cards. And if we change one thing about what we believe, all of a sudden it means that nothing that we believe is valid. And I'm just here to say, God is bigger than that. It's okay. God changed God's mind. Jesus changed his mind, right? We see that. We get new information. We see different things happen in the world. It's okay if we're changed by that, if we're changed by empathy, if we're changed by hearing somebody's story and saying, actually, that makes sense, and I don't want to cause anybody pain. That's okay. And so, I I would ask you to land on the God that's bigger, and so if you're going to roll the dice about what you believe, like, can you land on the one that's more expansive and more loving, and and not operate out of fear? And I promise you, it's not the easy way out. It's Me being a Christian is way harder now than being in the world I was before, because I have to look at every single situation and think, what does love look like in this situation? It's not a list of do's and don'ts anymore. It asks so much more from me. It asks so much more nuance from me and compassion and not dehumanizing other people. And that is so hard. So I see this as a gift to folks. If you can say, this is my challenge, how to love when I don't understand, how to love when I'm afraid, how to love when I see difference. That's what I'm up against. That's what we're all up against. And I think that we can land on the God that is bigger. We have to.
I was struck by your house of cards metaphor because the notion that, if you take the one card out, the house of cards falls down, and that would be the thing that would terrify people. If you're afraid that your house of cards is going to fall down, it's probably because it's a house of cards.
Yeah, that's
And like
true.
other things that can knock down a house of cards include a light breeze or a cat walking by. So like
Right.
if and this is one of the things that I mean, I tend to be a little bit more blunt. You have a very generous and eloquent way of speaking, but my whole thing is if your faith is so weak that it can be shattered by the existence of another person. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not saying, just saying. But let's
Mm-hmm.
get into, I don't want to get too far into the minutia of the the policies that have been announced because as we're having this conversation, I think it's just more this is not going to be a policy conversation. I think this is a conversation that a lot of people need to hear, and I don't want to
Hmm.
distract from it with, well, let's talk about the specific details. But, you know, yesterday we saw the premier of well, rewind the clock. On Saturday last week, we heard the premier of Alberta on her radio show say, despite the fact that she has a extensive history of saying, I'm never going to go anywhere near these issues, she came out and said, yeah, we have some policies that we're going to be introducing on parental rights.
Right.
And everybody went, oh shit. And then yesterday, which was Wednesday, January 31st, we saw the premier come out with a well produced, super slick. It was like, I think we put out something to the effect of, it doesn't matter how softly the premier speaks or how soft the music is, she just threw vulnerable kids under the bus. Uh,
Hmm.
because it was a
Yeah.
master of communications in that it was, hey, I'm going to talk really sincerely sounding and I'm going to throw in a couple of things
Hmm.
that maybe sound like they're positive, but also um, to all the trans kids out there, we're just going to erase you. You don't get to exist until you're at least 17. Hope you're okay with that. But once you're there, we'll have lots of supports if you manage to survive that long. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but
Yeah.
what was your how has the week been for you as an advocate watching all of this? What have your thoughts and takeaways been?
Yeah. Uh, well, I'll be blunt. You know, I sat there after watching the video and I just thought the only sentence that came to my mind is this is a death sentence. And I hate saying that. Uh, but it is. I mean, there's just so much evidence. And when I say evidence, I mean bodies, right? I mean, like we can say numbers, but like children's bodies that are not here anymore because of these ideas. Um, and so I couldn't even like move for 10 minutes because I was like, that's, this is the worst thing I've ever heard in Canada. This is the most backwards, unscientific, unproven thing I've ever heard. This is more intense than we could have imagined. Like, this is so strategic. It is so surgically made to eliminate trans kids and their ability to thrive. Like, it's just so unconscionable to me. Um, and just and I don't have a trans identity, and it is scary because yes, we're going to fight back against it, of course, and we all need to. In the meantime, the collateral damage is we won't know. Like, we'll know some of it, but we won't know all of it. Um, but every single trans person who hears anything about this coming out, it's just like a punch in the gut. And it is beyond dehumanizing. And, I think anybody who watches it and thinks that it's thoughtful or compassionate or, well researched or anything like that hasn't read anything else. Um, so it's just dangerous. I mean, it's really ineffable to me. Like, I mean, I could say all kinds of words about what I think about her and this whole movement, and that those would be fair. But you know, it just reignites the fire within me to keep kids alive, and let them know that whatever this is, we're going to fight against it. Like, our community will always take care of you. Like, we're here. Um, and governments have tried to eliminate us many times before, and we've come through. And what I say to potential allies, and like the collateral damage is immense. So while we also can give messages of hope, which are true, we also need to give messages of great extreme warning, which are also true. Um, because yeah, I haven't seen anything this bad and this intricate. And the fact that she not only comes after trans kids and trans athletes, um, but also says that almost all parents who disagree with their children will create a safe space for them still is the I mean that's the okay, all of it's one of the big lies in a pile of them. That's just not true. um I am a parent, and I am sorry to say, I am horrified to say how many kids I know, who are in precarious living situations, who completely change their demeanor and their clothes when they go home, who are on the brink of not being in this world anymore because their parents are not a safe space for them. And um, and I think parents who truly come from a place of being caring and loving need to understand that that's not a universal thing that every parent takes seriously. Um, and parental rights are like, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. Like, you have so much control over your child. And number one is your responsibility to keep them alive. That's it. Like, number one, and make sure that they can thrive in what they're doing. So if you want to have a right, that's your right. You have a right to have a child, and you have a right to keep them alive. And this is not going to do that. And to me, the amount of fear around, oh, what's happening in our schools, and we're going to lose control of everything, and this ideology, and getting caught up in all of that like tornado of fear, just obfuscates the reality that kids are not influenced by all these other things about who they are. It's only saying, hey, the moon exists, and yes, it is bright at night, um, but they're still going to be there. So yeah, I've gotten emails from all over the country, with different organizations and people just saying like, hey, we've got to get together, like, how are we going to respond against this? And I want people to hear that too, that there are people who care, like people who don't live here, people who it doesn't impact directly, who are like, how can we like go against this? How can we make sure that people aren't alone? How can we take care of folks in the midst of all of this, right? So both of those things can be true at the same time. There's so many more people than you think who are for you. And this government has made an extremely um, fatal choice to try to put this stuff forward.
I mean, the number's 28%. I was reading a study this morning. It's a study conducted in Canada. 28% of trans kids say that they do not have a supportive home environment. So we're not talking about a small number of parents aren't supportive of
Right,
trans kids. We're talking about 1 in 4. And when
right.
you take a look at the suicide risk and rates among trans kids, these are not insubstantial numbers. Um, and it just makes me I am holding myself back today because of how gracious you're being.
I
Uh,
mean, be yourself, right? Do what you need to do.
well, here's the other thing about this announcement that I think people need to be aware of is they've done a really, really good job of using, painting a giant trans target. Um,
Right.
but there's other things that are going on here. They've made it so that it's opt-in for sexual education for kids. And
Mm-hmm.
they've justified all of these changes to the rules supporting trans kids and for trans affirming care. They've justified all of these rules saying, "Hey, you know what? We don't want kids under 18 making, choices that could negatively impact the rest of their life or their hormones of their bodies or anything like that." Well, here's another reality. It's demonstrated that when you drop sexual education, teen pregnancies go up. Now,
Yep.
I'm not a teenage girl. I've never been a teenage mom, but my understanding is pregnancy not only messes with your hormones, it messes with your body and it has potentially some life-changing implications. So
Mm-hmm.
there's an incredible hypocrisy at play here for me where they're like, oh, we're trying to protect the kids. No, you're not. You're trying to assert control over your kids because you're uncomfortable with notions of gender and identity as sex. And if you just said that, then I could at least respect the integrity of your position, but you're lying. And
Right.
you're just lying because you're afraid and that you're going to kill kids
Yeah.
because you're afraid. And
That's yeah. I mean, I
thank
agree
you
with
for
that
letting me do that.
100%. No, I agree with you 100%. It is like I said, it's a death sentence, and it's blood on their hands, like right now, from day one, like from that moment. I mean, um, and I think, yeah, what basically they're like, all here's all this fear mongering and horrible, unsubstantiated claims and everything about trans kids and surgery and blah blah blah. Like, let's just scare everybody that everybody is, you know, at 2 years old, guzzling down hormones or something. Like, they're just all of this horrible stuff, right? And then they say, oh, that. And then also, so if there's any talk about this stuff, or, gender identity, sexual orientation, human sexuality, so like, yeah, we're not going to have that anymore. Like, it's an opt-in for parents. And then, oh, if there's any curriculum that's in there, like, oops, we have to approve it. So yeah, they just slide that in as part of, let's fear monger this whole entire group of people and make you really scared and give you horrible, bad information and bad science. And then we're going to also say, oh yeah, and then we're just going to like eliminate this. And like you said, it is, we can't oppress one thing and not others. Like, that's just not how humanity works. That isn't right. I mean, we can try, um, and people do try, but that's not how it works. So, exactly what you said, Nate. It is proven that in a school that has an active GSA or QSA, Gay Straight Alliance group, Queer Straight Alliance group, you know who benefits from that? Straight people. Those schools have better attendance, better quality of experience for the students who come, specifically for straight males, because there is a standard set that we don't have to conform and act out of what we are supposed to do, quote unquote, as men, and be aggressive and not show emotion, et cetera, et cetera. So it is shown that when we create spaces where we say, hey, everybody exists, that's cool. And maybe we have spaces where people can talk about the challenges that come up because the world isn't a very friendly place for them all of the time. Wow, that actually helps everybody. And yes, like the rates that we still have where women are sexually assaulted and they don't come forward for a million valid reasons because they get treated awfully and it's usually not convicted, and all of those horrible things that happen to women and girls in school. We're not just eliminating sexual education, in terms of not getting pregnant, but we're limiting conversation about sexuality in general, which limits our conversation about consent. So we are saying this whole thing of human sexuality is shameful and we're not going to talk about it. So kids are going to get their information somewhere, and they're going to get their information usually from something that they look up, which probably isn't correct, something they're watching, which isn't reality, something a friend told them, which is not a lived experience and isn't true. And they're going to go about fumbling through romantic and sexual relationships with no idea how to ask for consent or give it, no idea how to have safe and consensual sex, no idea, oh, this relationship might actually be abusive. I don't know what to do. So we are impacting everybody when we say this whole thing of sex. Ooh, it's scary over here. Kids are going to explore and do what they're going to do anyway. And so we need to provide them with ways to have conversation, ask questions, be curious, be who they are. They're curious about what's happening. To have those conversations and be there for them and be able to provide something that's different than what they're seeing on the internet or on TV or whatever, and do them like that's what we're supposed to do, is provide them with these basic tools to say, like, yes, when we engage in these things, we have to treat each other with dignity and respect. That's what we want. Like, and no matter what gender you are, like, so we are just throwing all of this stuff away that provides a safer environment for kids of all orientations and all gender identities. And we're going to see how that ideology continues to play out, because the first people who are targeted, in this case, trans youth, and obviously queer people in general, if they're trying to remove any mention of us, like I said, social visibility, no, you're gone, right? And then, Nate, you mentioned teen pregnancy rates go up, right? And what's going to happen next, right? If we have this whole ideology, sex is bad, we can't talk about it, there's not consent, there's not this, all this stuff, pregnancy is going to go up. But we see the next step in the extremist strategy is taking away reproductive rights. So we're going to create environments where it's more likely that people who aren't prepared to have a child physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, we're going to put them in a situation. We're not going to tell them about how to do anything to prevent that from happening. And then we're going to force them to have a baby in a situation where they're not ready to take care of it. And we're going to call that pro-life. That's the next step. I mean, I'm not a genius. Like, that is the next thing. That's exactly what they did in the States. That's exactly what's going to happen here. So if anybody's like, okay, well, yeah, trans people are only like 0.3% of the population. Like, okay, hopefully they'll figure, I'm a good citizen. Hopefully they'll figure it out. Like, like I want everybody to like be okay. Okay. Well, they're coming after you. And, so all of these things are melded together, because the power of trying to keep the people who are at the top, heterosexual white men mostly, want to continue to grab onto that and remove people's agency from their own bodies, from their own expressions. And we see some laws that have come about in the States for around trans people have actually limited cisgender women from getting different surgeries that they want to get, right? Because those things aren't available anymore. They're not allowed to get them. So, it's not, oh, hey, we need to be concerned about this, selfishly because it's going to impact us. But we need to know that if we think that we're going to slide through this as our own person and it's not going to impact us in some way, that's the next step. And and guess what? While we're doing that, we're also not creating better environments to support people who maybe it's not ideal, but they choose to have the kid. We're also not in a province or in an administration right now who's like, okay, what about affordable childcare? How can we help out people who are single parents? That's not the attitude. So it's just pro-birth. It's not pro-life. And, so that trickle down fact is going to happen, right? So that's why it's so important for all of us to realize and see that our liberation is tied together, metaphorically, I think spiritually, but also physically in real time, and say, no, it's not okay that we put policies in place in our governments with people who we voted for. And we said, yes, you can make decisions. And we say, yes, you're going to put things in place where we know people are going to die. We know this is going to bring down the quality of life for people. We can't do that. And as far as I see so far, at least right now, this is a democracy, right? So we have the ability to use our voice and speak back into that, and we need to.
To your point, like as you were speaking there, the we need to is so important, and I would challenge anyone, and this speaking for all of the cisgendered straight middle-aged white guys out there, because I feel like I can because I'm so that was a privileged joke. Uh, I think that if you have the ability to even say something when somebody else is being punched down on, when somebody else is being beat on, and you choose not to, you choose to do nothing, you choose to say nothing, you are either lazy or a coward or both. And those are your three choices. You can pick any one of the three, but that's the bottom line. If you have the means to speak up and you simply choose not to, you're lazy, you're coward, or you're both.
And I would say to folks who, you know, here's the thing. I have nothing I have nothing there's nothing shameful about having privilege, right? We just do, right? And depending on where we're at in the world in our life, it changes. Um the reality is how are we going to use it, right? I have privilege to speak to certain people that wouldn't listen to you, Nate, for example, and vice versa, right? And so we need to work together and realize that we have so many things in common to be able to reach different folks. And here's the thing that you see in Danielle Smith is it doesn't take a white guy to enforce white nationalism and patriarchy. He doesn't have to be in the room, but that's exactly what's being enforced right now. So the ideas of the patriarchy and the structure and how people get rewarded for the different political moves they make, that's still the same. Happens to be a woman who is doing it, but she's enforcing the same exact strategy, and you're going to see that as reproductive rights get start being talked about, right? So it's up to us as people who are in all different places in life and spheres of influence to influence the people that we can, right? And I think that that's so important. There's going to be a diversity of strategies. For some people, it's going to be showing up at the protest and, being putting boots on the ground and being there in person. For some people, it's writing letters. For some people, it's having a conversation with your neighbor. For some people, maybe your trans grandchild is going to come to you and say, I need to live with you, right? There's going to be lots of different things that we can do, and lots of different ways to be an activist. So if you're saying, oh, well, I'm not like that, that's not me, or, I'm not in a place where I can do that, find something. Somebody is looking up to you. Somebody is looking up to you. Maybe it's just one person who is in your house, but somebody is looking up to you and listening to what you're saying about this. And it matters. And, like I said, letting people know that they're not alone is the biggest thing that we can do right now. Because that's the myth. That's the greatest lie of that whole video is basically saying, like, you're alone and sorry, this is going to happen. And that's not true. They're not alone. Um, so we all have a responsibility and the agency to be able to make some change. And I invite you to come along with us.
I want to give you the space to say, I do know, and it's blows my mind, but I do know that we do have uh, younger people who listen to this show. Again, blows my mind. Like the fact that a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old wants to listen to a 47-year-old white guy pontificate on politics. Like, wow. I mean, that's cool, but whatever. But I want to give, what do you want to say to the kids, the youth? What do you want the kids who might know somebody who's, I mean, obviously, like we talked about, the implications of these changes go way beyond uh, trans kids, but trans kids are very clearly the bullseye of the target that they're aiming for. What do you want to say to people who are wondering about how to support trans kids who are in their schools? What do you want to say to people who are
Mm-hmm.
uh, trans and feeling alone and targeted right now?
Mm-hmm. I mean, for trans kids, I can't say that I know exactly how you feel because I don't. And I can really truly only imagine what it's like for your rights to just be discussed so flippantly, like uh but I believe with all my heart that um there's more of us who care about you than not. And you know what? The reason that there is so much thrashing, that there is so much noise to try to retract back is because there is so much progress. And they're in the death throes of saying, no, we need to have this control. We need to make sure that people express themselves in the way that we're used to and how we reward people in society. But that's dying. And we have so many more people who represent our whole communities who we can see thriving. And no matter what, there's no timeline on you being you. What's important is that you stick around because your existence is treasured. We need you. Um, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you can express yourself in the way that is true for you. And, find people, if that's not your family, but find people because there are people who are going to support you, call you by your name, and see who you are. And you'll make it. I mean, here's the thing. Trans kids are some of the like smartest, most politically active, amazing people I know. Um, so they're probably are organizing even better than we are in some ways. Um, do what you need to do to take care of yourself and know that you are perfect as you are. And even if you can't quite see yourself in the mirror right now, you will. And so many people are going to be so excited to see who you are too. And I would say to young folks who, you know, don't have a queer identity but are in schools is like this is the time. Like y'all are the most powerful, force right now on social media in terms of consumers. Like you have the ability to create noise that we don't know how to make. Um, and you have the ability to speak love and compassion and equality back into this. And you have the ability to bring us forward beyond what we are comfortable with, what we feel like, well, it's always been this way. You have the ability to stretch that and say, no, we exist. And so, reach into the innate leadership that you have in you because you do, and think about what you can do in your environment, in your school, in your GSA or QSA, in your club. Find people who are like-minded um, and make some noise because your voice matters more than mine. Trans voice matters more than mine. And um, yeah, we need to take care of each other. Like I said, governments are going to come after us. Different things are going to happen. Throughout history, our community has been there for each other, and our allies have been there for us. They have been a big piece of that. So don't discount the ability that you have to make a difference because of your age or because of your identity. We need everybody, and especially you.
I just want to tack on to that if I can, because that's what
Yeah.
cisgender middle-aged white guys do.
I'll just say what you missed
Well,
here.
no, but I don't want to say that you missed anything, but one of the things that I regularly hear people say, and it's become a tragic refrain in some ways, is, they want kids, people who are the targets of this sort of legislation, especially given that the provincial government has said, well, we'll use the notwithstanding clause if we have to. Um, everybody says it gets better. And I know that I can only imagine how difficult it is to hear it gets better when you're in the throes of it. And so I just wanted to point out as a little footnote for this episode, in 2000, Alberta enacted the notwithstanding clause to try to prevent gay marriage in the province of Alberta. And I just finished an hour and a half long conversation with a married, super gay ukulele shredder. So it
Who's
does
married,
empirically. It
gay married.
exactly. So it it does it does empirically get better. I mean, they
Yeah,
tried to use the notwithstanding clause. The Supreme Court said, "Well, that's lame sauce," and it expired. And now I'm
yeah,
having a conversation with a super gay married woman. So
yeah,
hang in there.
yeah,
Cam, any
yeah.
final thoughts?
Thanks for your interest in this conversation. And I think what we can all agree on is that everybody deserves to live. And if we just center that in the decisions that we make, I think we will agree on way more than we think we do. And right now, in as an Albertan, as a Canadian, right now, we need to make sure that trans kids live. And we're telling you, as people who are in this work all the time and have been for decades, that these things will make that not possible. So I hope that you'll listen, and I hope that you'll take our lead because we need you.
Awesome. Pam Rocker, everybody. Thank you so much, Pam.
Thanks a lot, Nate.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.